There was an old couple who had hired a new maid to help around their house. The wife had a huge doll collection, and the maid was expected to dust them once a week. So once a week, the maid walked into the room where the dolls were stored and looked at them in disgust. She hated dolls. While she was dusting, she came across a particularly strange doll. It was a talking doll, and it had a cord in the back. The maid was interested and pulled the cord. The doll said, "Hello?" The maid pulled the cord again. "I love my mama," said the doll. The maid put the doll back and continued cleaning. A few weeks later, while dusting off the dolls, the maid accidentally knocked a doll over. It shattered as soon as it hit the ground. The old woman heard the sound and went to investigate. When she walked into the room and saw her shattered doll, a very sad look came across her face. The maid saw this quickly and said, "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to break her. I won't do it again." The old woman looked down at her sad, broken doll and told the maid that she could only keep her job if she promised to be extra careful around the dolls. The maid agreed. The next day, the old couple left the maid alone while they went out to run some errands. The maid was in such a bad mood that she neglected to do her job. While she was sitting in the kitchen enjoying some of the couple's fancy chocolate, the maid thought of a vicious idea. She slowly made her way into the room where the dolls were kept. She thought for a moment about how sad the old woman was about her broken doll. The maid picked up a doll and said, "She must really love these dolls," and threw the doll on the floor. It shattered and the maid smiled. She loved the feeling of breaking dolls. Something about the shattering sound pleased her. She threw more and more dolls to the floor. She was still in her doll-killing rage when the old couple came through the door. The old woman ran to her broken dolls. She looked up at the maid with a baleful expression and asked, "What are you doing?" The husband, seeing his wife so upset, immediately told the maid she was fired. The maid collected her things and left in an even worse mood before. She was so angry that later that night she snuck back into the old couple's home. Knowing they would be sound asleep, she crept into the kitchen, found the biggest knife she could, and made her way to the bedroom. The next morning, the maid returned to the house and acted like an innocent bystander and told the police that she worked for the couple. She played the sorry victim that had lost good friends. She told police that the old couple were loving, nice, caring people, and she had no idea why anyone would want to kill them. At that point, she slowly walked into the house, saying she wished to make sure no one had hurt the old woman's precious doll collection. When she got to the talking doll, she picked it up and pulled the cord. "Hello," it said. She pulled the cord again and it said, "Why did you kill my mama?" The maid looked horrified. "What did you just say? Why did you kill mama?" asked the doll. The maid stared in shock. She kept pulling the cord. "Why did you kill my mama? She was a nice mama. I loved her very much. Why did you kill my mama?" The maid stared at the doll. She could not believe this was happening. "You killed my mama!" the doll screamed. The maid threw it to the ground and ran from the house. The next morning, the maid was found dead in her bed. In her arms was the talking doll. When investigators pulled the cord on the doll's back, it just kept repeating, "She killed my mama. She killed my mama. She killed my mama." There was a 21-year-old man loved to travel to exotic countries. After a while, he grew bored of the usual holiday destinations and wanted a trip that would be more exciting. His plan was to backpack around Southeast Asia for a few months. He thought that it would be a great experience to feel the freedom of traveling through remote areas, crossing mountains and meeting random people along the way. His first destination was China. When his plane landed in Beijing, the only luggage he had was the small backpack he was carrying. However, the young man didn't want to stay for very long in the hustle and bustle of a huge Chinese city. He was eager to explore the hills and valleys of the vast country. The young man had an idea that he was sure would turn his little backpacking trip into a much more interesting adventure. He decided to randomly hop on a bus without having any idea where it was going. Not knowing the destination made it feel like he was taking a mystery tour around China. Every time the bus reached the end of the line, he would hop off and randomly catch another bus, never knowing or caring where it would take him. After a few weeks, he found himself traveling around some of the most remote regions in China. It was an area that tourists seldom visited. The man was delighted to be passing through all the tiny villages and having the opportunity to see how the rural Chinese people really lived. One day, he found himself traveling on yet another bus, passing through yet another remote area. When they set out, the bus was empty, but after 6 stops, a large crowd of people got on and it was filled to capacity. After a while, he noticed that the other passengers kept looking at him strangely. The young man also thought it was odd that they chose to stand instead of sitting down in the vacant seat next to him. At the next stop, a beautiful Chinese woman boarded the bus. She looked around, and when she saw the young backpacker, her eyes suddenly grew wide with shock. When she hurried down the aisle and sat down beside him, he was a bit surprised too. Suddenly, the woman nudged him and whispered, "Do you know where you are going?" "I have no idea," replied the man with a smile. "I'm just backpacking around the country. I got on this bus without looking at the destination." "Well, I must warn you that you are in grave danger," she said. "Why?" asked the man. "The next stop is the end of the line," said the woman. "It is a small village that has an awful reputation. The people who live there prey on Western tourists who become lost. They are cannibals." The man couldn't believe what she was saying. At first, he thought she must be joking, but when he looked at her face, he could not even detect the smallest hint of a smile. "Surely you can't be serious," he said. "What I am telling you is the truth," replied the woman. "If you are wise, you will take heed of what I tell you. Everyone in this area has heard the horrible tales of what goes on in this village. In my language, it is called the man-eating village." The woman's words shocked the young backpacker to his very core. He found himself lost for words. "If you don't believe me, just look around," she continued. "Almost all of the passengers on this bus are from that village." The young man looked up and realized that all of the other passengers were staring at him hungrily and licking their lips. "When the bus reaches the end of the line, you will be on their territory," said the woman. "No one will be able to save you. They will take hold of you and eat you alive." The backpacker broke out into a cold sweat. He could see the murderous look in the eyes of the slavering Chinese villagers. He had to escape before the bus reached the village. Just then, he felt the bus begin to slow down as it ascended a steep mountain road. "This is our chance," said the woman. "Let's go." She grabbed him by the hand and they ran down the aisle to the back of the bus before the other passengers had a chance to react. The woman pulled the handle of the emergency exit and then jumped out. The backpacker was right behind her and leaped through the narrow opening. He crashed onto the dirt road, then rolled over and picked himself up. He saw the woman jump across a ditch and run off. He followed her, running as fast as he could. They escaped into the mountains as the angry yells of the other passengers echoed behind them. The man fled for his life, scrambling up the steep mountain slope, desperate to evade the hungry cannibals who were pursuing him. Eventually, the Chinese villagers gave up the chase and returned to the bus. The man was exhausted, but he was overjoyed that he had managed to escape their ravenous clutches. As he lay on a large rock trying to catch his breath, he heard the woman laughing softly to herself. "Now I can eat alone," she said. "I have a son who I love with all my heart, but even though he is 5 years old, he is not able to speak. I can't stand it when people refer to him as dumb. He's an intelligent boy, but he has a problem. When he was just a baby, my son suffered a serious illness. He recovered from the disease, but he never learned to speak. My wife and I took him to several psychologists and therapists, but none of them were able to help him. They said the cause of his problem was psychosomatic, and he would eventually grow out of it. My wife and I spent a lot of time with our son, talking to him and encouraging him to repeat words after us. All he was ever able to make was a high-pitched wailing sound. Sometimes he would get very frustrated and break down crying. All we could do was hug him and assure him that we loved him. One day I was in a toy store and a doll on one of the shelves caught my eye. It was a talking robot. I decided to buy it for my son as a present, hoping it might help him finally learn to speak. When my son opened the box and saw the talking robot, he was overjoyed. He hugged me and made high-pitched wails. I pulled the string at the back and showed him how to get the robot talking. My son fell in love with that toy and brought it everywhere he went. I would often hear him playing with it in his bedroom, pulling the string and making the robot talk. However, my son never spoke a word. Then one morning, my son came down to breakfast, and I put a plate of waffles in front of him. "I don't like this," he muttered. I couldn't believe my ears. He repeated, "I said, I don't like waffles," in a dull monotone. I was overjoyed and hugged him tightly, but his explanation was chilling. My son pointed to his bedroom and said, "It was the robot. The robot gave its power to me." From that day forward, my son began talking, but always in the same dull monotone. He showed no emotion anymore, never crying, smiling, or hugging me. He just stared at me blankly. He also stopped playing with the talking robot entirely. Yesterday, I picked up the robot and pulled the string. It made a high-pitched wailing sound, the same wail my son used to make. No matter how many times I pulled the string, it kept making that sound. Even though my son no longer plays with it, I am afraid to throw the talking robot away. Did you and your parents ever play games together? When Jasmine was younger, something strange happened. One night, her mother checked up on her while she was sleeping, but it wasn't the way that you usually think. She woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling that someone or something had been watching her. She looked up and saw that her mother was just standing there, smiling and staring at her with her eyes unnaturally wide open. Jasmine asked what she was doing up in the middle of the night, and her mother replied, "I'm watching you sleep." Jasmine knew something was wrong. They kept staring at each other, and neither of them blinked. Jasmine somehow knew they were playing a game together, a game to see who would blink first. But what would happen if Jasmine blinked? She was terrified to find out. This figure in her bedroom was not her mother. It was in her eyes. It held something terrifying, something inhuman. Soon, this version of her mother began moving backwards, without blinking, turning around or breaking eye contact. She just moved back until she reached Jasmine's closet, then opened the door and stepped inside, as if she'd been staying there this entire time. Jasmine kept staring at the closet, and without breaking eye contact, ran to her parents' room. There, she saw her mother on her bed, sleeping peacefully, just like broadcasting.